welcome back to the YBF podcast. And it's your girl, Natasha. And I'm back with another YBF Politics episode. And y'all know the deal. It's, we're infusing our favorite things, entertainment, pop culture, as well as politics. So this episode is part of the YBF Politics vertical, and I have a very special guest. You all know we have candidates on, we have sitting politicians as well as candidates that are running for positions in Congress or vice president or local politicians and every position you can think of. But we also love to talk to activists and people that are on the ground doing the work that we talk about the politicians putting into play. So today I have someone that I know personally, and I think that it's just so amazing that he is in the position he's in. It makes perfect sense. As long as I've known him, it makes perfect sense for what he's doing now. He's on the ground in Louisville, Kentucky, and we all know the drama going down there. So it's a lot to talk about. We want to get firsthand information about what's happening there, what we can do as a people to help out, and we just want firsthand info. We want to get into it, and with someone who is obviously an expert in everything that we're about to talk about. So please welcome to the show, Chief Engagement Officer for the Louisville Urban League, Mr. Lyndon Pryor.
And thank you. Hello. Thank you for having me on. And before we get started, let me just make sure I say congratulations to you on all the success, just YBF. And then I knew at some point you was going to come back to your roots with this politics vertical. We were waiting on it for a while. So just so glad to see you doing all the things and leading out here as well as you do. So thank you for having me on.
Oh, thank you so much. So Lyndon and I went to Texas A&M University together. Whoop. And we're actually going to talk about some college football talk and SEC and stuff like that, because there is an intersection there with social justice in college football and sports in general. So that's interesting. But it's interesting because me and him were both political science majors at a very conservative university. And I think back in college, you were a little bit more, I don't want to say the word militant. What's the word?
That's what they call me. That's okay.
A little bit more like gung-ho about, we're not waiting on y'all for change. We're about to do what we need to do. Like that was you. I was more like, well, let's learn about like how we can all come together and how we can do this and that. And now I'm like, nah, F this. We about to do what we need to do. Like, you just get to that point,
Yes, so, you went inside. You was all student government. And just talk to the people and make the friends. And they're better than you think, Lyndon.
Yeah.
No, they're not.
I was definitely in student government. Definitely like all about student government in every way possible. And I think it was a learning experience for sure. And it's definitely taught me a lot about how the world works, especially at such a conservative university like Texas A&M. And I mean, I feel like our freshman year, even when we got to campus, there was like protest galore. There was always something we were protesting that had to do with racism. And if you all don't know out there about Texas A&M, the number of Black students is minuscule.
Minute.
Like, I think it's more minuscule than Ivy League universities. Like, it's very, very small. And for a state school, that it doesn't make sense, but it is what it is. So that's something we were always cognizant of and trying to address, but trying to go against adults and people in power when we're just 18, 19 years old. We didn't always feel heard, but still felt heard in some ways. But we were on the ground protesting from newspaper articles with cartoons that were depicting us as menstrual symbols. And I mean, it was just the craziest crap that we had to go through as freshmen in college. But I think it definitely prepared me for everything I'm seeing now. None of this surprises me, everything that we're seeing. And I think it surprises a lot of people, but it doesn't surprise people like me and you. And we were in classes where we will be not only the two Black people in the class, probably, out of like 400, 500 students if it's an intro class, but the only like non-conservative people as well. So it was usually me and him against the world, y'all. Like, like any debate, we're like, oh God, it's us again. And this was when, Bush was president, and it was a lot. So you tell me, how do you think your college experience impacted what you're doing now?
I think, to what you said, I think it really prepared you for the way the world works. You know, we got to see at A&M a lot of things firsthand from the standpoint of just how blatantly racist it is. And that's, I mean, you know, you're from Louisiana, I'm from Texas, so we kind of know the South. In the South, you know, racism is everywhere, but the South is just kind of a little bit more in your face. Like, the folks just tell you stuff. And so I think we were kind of used to it. Like, there were some parts of it, but I think being just swimming in it the way we were at A&M was
paying to experience it too. You know, tuition to get
right. Like, it was one of those things where it's like, oh wow, and you started to understand kind of like how it all is built, like the institutionalization of it, right? Like, I think coming out of high school, I kind of saw racism as just like this group behavior or maybe individual behavior, right? Like, I didn't really understand the systematic ways in which this thing worked. But being at A&M, like, you know, it's one thing you hearing it from your students, but then it's another thing when you start hearing administrators and professors talk a certain way about you, or talk about Black students in a certain way. You start hearing community members or people in the system who talk about it that way, and it's just like, oh, okay, wait, this is laid out in a very different way. Like, this is more than just, you know, a few bad people or a few bad apples or what this is. This is like an institutionalized thing where this has been passed down historically. Like, literally, it is tradition, you know, and for those who understand A&M, you will understand that reference. Like, it is tradition, like, in how we do this, which I think absolutely prepared me for the world, because that is the way racism works out in society. Like, it is not just these individual bad acts, as we would, you know, as many in the media would love to make us believe, like, oh, you know, that's just one bad police officer, or that's just one bad individual who did this or did that or whatever. No, this is systematic. This is what we have been taught. This is what is learned. This is what is ingrained in us. And I say us, including Black people, because we pick up and participate in that stuff as much as anybody else does in many ways. And so, like, it is ingrained in us in remarkable ways. And it was because of A&M that I began to understand that, and have continued to grow in understanding of that since I left there. Yeah.
And you were one of the founders, or if not the founder, God, my memory, of like it was Black Student Union, right?
Basically, yeah. We couldn't call it that because they wouldn't, because the institution wouldn't allow us to have a Black Student Union.
Right.
Like,
what did we call?
The Memorial Student Center is the student union, and therefore there can't be a Black student union at the at the university. But
I can't remember what we called it, but you were one of the founders of that and the president of that. And I just thought it was just so crazy to me how hard it was to even get something like that. But that should tell you guys, like he just said, everything is systemic. Everything is intentionally set up in a certain way to keep things as they are. Status quo is king everywhere, not just on college campuses, but in the United States of America, really in the world, but definitely here in America. So what do you feel you learned when it came to bucking the system? Like, how do you apply things that you learned just growing up, especially in college as well, to your position where you are right now? How are you applying those things? How are you bucking the system now and getting people to buy in?
So that's a really interesting question, because I think I talk about that a lot now, because I think in my role and what's happening here in Louisville and what's happening across the country, I have long held the belief I now have long held the belief that it's a both and. So you referenced like how I was in college, and I was very much a, you got to do it from the outside of the system. You know, you can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools type of thing. Like that kind of was my idea. Like, we don't need them. And little did I realize at the time that even in holding that position, I still got pulled into that organization. It was AASC, African American Student Coalition. It got pulled into that very system, and we kind of got co-opted in a way from doing the things that we wanted without even really realizing it. It took leaving college and going and get a master's degree and understanding higher education to figure out how that happened. But I very much had the opinion of, like, everything has to happen from the outside. Like, that's the way you're going to destroy this system. But now what I realize is that it's very much a both and sort of thing. Like you cannot, we are not going to get free of this thing simply by bombarding it from the outside. And we certainly aren't going to get free simply by being on the inside. It is going to take both. And the best example of that is what we are seeing happening now in the streets all across America, and particularly here in Louisville. Like the little bit of movement that we've gotten, whether that be on Breonna Taylor's case or even on some other community actions that have happened recently here, have happened in large part, if not solely, because there are people in the streets every single day. Right? Like there are people out there causing disruption, making a scene, making noise peacefully, but they are inconveniencing people in ways that they are not used to. And it is that pressure, it is that political pressure, it is that public pressure that has broken the wheel in some places, not fully, but in some places of folks in power to start conceding that, hey, things have to change. We've got to move that. And so now you've got people who are on the inside, or people like our organization, the Urban League, which is not necessarily leading things out on the ground, but certainly is supportive of that and helping move some of that work forward. But we are certainly more so having conversations behind the scenes and working with government officials and others and corporate leaders and companies to be able to move tangible things forward. Those folks in the street allow our job to be that much easier when we're having those conversations, so that we can then get hold of resources, get hold of opportunities, and funnel that back to our communities. And so it's very much a both and approach. And that is something that very much coming out of college that I have learned. That's been the lesson. And that was, for the brief time that I was working with college students, that was the game that I tried to put them up on, was like, look, y'all trying to do everything inside the system, because I had a lot of students who wanted to be, you know, like, let's go ask for permission to protest, or let's go work with student government. I was like, that's all well and good, but if y'all don't have something on the outside, something that they are not actively in control of, because they control all of that. And so they are dictating all your moves in that realm. But if y'all aren't doing something on the outside, something that is utilizing your free movement, your free voice over here, you're not going to be successful. You've got to do them both. You've got to put them both together in order to get traction. And so I'm glad to see at our alma mater that there has been some movement. We'll see how far they get.
It's like, oh, we've been there before.
I get my hopes up. I can't get my hopes up, but I'm glad to see that there are some folks who are moving on that. And I wish there were more Black former students who were lifting those kids up, because I mean, there are some folks down there who are fighting their tails off to see change happen. And so I need more of us to lend our voice to say, like, we support y'all and get it done. Like, let's move.
Yeah, some former students have definitely reached out to me about, talking to them about what we did. Oh my God, I feel so old saying back in the day.
I know, right? Like,
how long has it been?
Exactly.
I mean, it's literally been 20 years since I stepped
20 years.
Oh my God.
We had some of the exact same fights that they had. It is crazy.
Yeah, and they're like, well, what did y'all do? I was like, child, first of all, let me try to remember freshman year. But everything that they're dealing with right now, from crazy crap in the battalion, the school newspaper, to even like just the city's newspaper as well, which is also a pretty big deal in a college town, to, the Corps of Cadets doing things. The Corps of Cadets was allowed to fly Confederate flags while we were still on campus. I used to have to walk past that every single day to get to class, like just all in your face, just Confederate flags. And now there's that issue of people being, certain federal government officials demanding that there cannot be, Confederate flags in certain places. And that was a huge uproar on A&M's campus, which is a very traditionally ROTC core Army type school. I mean, that's raising hell as well. So, and then the statues on campus of Sully and Sully Ross or whatever, and all these racist figures that have statues on campus. And we were always trying to get a Henry Gaines statue and stuff like that, and to kind of combat the racist tropes that we would just see everywhere. And the school would be like, I mean, just putting us through all the hoops. And they're still putting them through all the hoops just to get that type of statue to salute a Black man who actually, you know, created some great things in the Deep South during that time. So it's like, I want to talk to him about it, but I'm also like, child, I don't think, if it hasn't changed in 20 years, I'm really not sure what to tell y'all. But I mean, I love that you still have hope there, that if they keep bucking the system, maybe it'll happen. I hear that they've raised money for this statue. I was like, didn't we raise the money for the statue? Like,
I mean, they've been raising money for that for 40 years. They finally, supposedly they finally got enough. Supposedly they got enough.
Allegedly. I was like, I think we had the money. I don't think the money was the issue, but okay, if that's what they told you. So yes, it is important that we keep telling people to operate outside the system as well, because they will continue to give you the runaround. They're going to continue to change the end goal, you know, the goalpost. They're going to keep moving it. Every time you reach it, it's, well, actually, we're not going to give you that because you need XYZ now. Now, F it. Sometimes you just got to go in and take it. And I really appreciate watching, you brought up the Breonna Taylor protest. I really appreciate watching celebs, reality show celebs, but celebs, and also some football players going to Kentucky and marching on the DA's lawn and you know, going to Mitch McConnell's house, and I mean, just doing the most, you know. And I think that that's amazing. Yes, they all got arrested and, you know, faced some felonies that thankfully got dropped. But I think it's things like that that cause people to pay attention, and it kind of puts pressure on the system to actually make a change. Why hasn't a change been made though? What is your take on what's going on with this Breonna Taylor situation and the cops not being arrested, not being, I mean, they've been fired, but you know, whatever, they can get hired in the next town over. So what's your take on this?
Well, so I'll start there and say they have not been fired. We have one officer has been fired. So there are 3 officers who breached her apartment and who fired shots that killed her that night. One of them has been fired, and he has a pretty reckless history of different things, and I think it's safe to say his acts that night, based on reporting, were the most egregious, supposedly firing through a window that was closed and curtained and all that sort of stuff. So
not yelling at their cops.
Right. And so it took a while for the mayor to fire him, which was a problem. But he ultimately has been fired, and I believe is in the process of appealing that decision. But the other 2 have not, and that is a failure, you know, for our mayor, and we have not been quiet about that. In that, because we truly believe that while the need to arrest and prosecute the officers is essential, we've known pretty much since the beginning that was not going to lie here in the county, that was going to be the state attorney general's under his purview. And so that's on Dan Cameron to do. And so that fight was going to continue regardless. However, had the mayor fired the 3 officers from jump, we probably would not have had the level of protests in this city. They still may have happened in Frankfurt, which is the capital, or other places, but they probably would not have happened at that level in this city because there would not have been a need. And so the folks who are still protesting today, whether you're out there, you know, physically, or those of us who are protesting in lots of other ways, really still are targeting the mayor in the fact that you have not done your job in firing these officers. And he has said that he doesn't believe that the other 2 officers have essentially done anything wrong. So where do we go from here?
If the mayor, the person that is charged to do this, says, nope, doesn't need to be done, what's the next step of action?
Well, so that's where we're looking to the Attorney General. And so we're hoping that within the coming weeks, we believe before Labor Day, certainly, but probably within the next week and a half or so, that he will release a finding and an indictment. And hopefully it will be for the 3 officers. Because if he indicts, it doesn't matter if the mayor fired them or not. They still are going to be arrested and tried and whatnot. And so we are hoping and holding out belief that he is going to do his job. And get indictments for all 3 officers. And so there is hope that ultimately, and that is the ultimate justice, right? Like that there is an arrest and a prosecution and a trial for all of that. And so there is still hope that that is going to happen, but we are absolutely hammering home that the mayor has not done his job, and we don't feel like he needs to get a pass on this, because the trick of that is, and one of the names that has not necessarily made a whole lot of national attention is David Mcatee, who was also killed here in Louisville following the protests around Breonna Taylor. Was killed in an incident with the National Guard and our local police department over in the West End of Louisville, where there were not protests. Louisville is a segregated city. The West End is where many of the Black folks reside.
Oh, okay.
Black folks were having an outing. David Mcatee, a local restaurateur, was cooking. Things were going on. For whatever reason, LNPD was deployed all the way over there, literally 18 blocks away from any other protests, to go over there and break it up. Ended up, they started firing pepper bullets, which then prompted him to fire a weapon, ultimately resulting in his death. And so, like, you've got, at least one person dead. We've also had another young man, Tyler Girth, who was killed down at Jefferson Square downtown. He was killed by another individual, but during a protest. So you've got 2 individuals who are dead truly because of mishandling things after Breonna Taylor's death. And that falls on the city, that falls on the mayor and his leadership or lack thereof. And that just has to be said.
When is the mayor's term over?
Well, so he just got elected, last year? So he's got 2 more years. They got 3-year terms here. So he's got a little bit longer, and this will be the last. He won't be eligible after that. He will have termed out. But he is the mayor. He is the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, for which we at the Louisville Urban League have said we don't feel like that's appropriate. Like, you can't be leading all of your peers in cities around the nation while all this shit is going on in your backyard. Right? And particularly because he will tout like, oh, we're talking about reparations at the U.S. Conference of Mayors. We're gonna talk about police reform, and we're like, wait, huh? How you gonna do that?
If y'all not doing
gonna lead police reform when you got all of this going on here? How you gonna talk about reparations when Louisville, Kentucky is the blueprint for redlining, which for folks looking in who may not know, redlining is the practice used by the federal government to basically denote places in a city where banks and other investors should or should not put their money. And it was largely based on race. So places where Black people were, banks shouldn't loan. Places where Black people weren't, it's okay to loan. And so what that means is, Black folks can't get home loans, Black folks can't get business loans, Black folks can't get auto loans, insurance is high, all sorts of stuff.
Cities.
Exactly. All the types of things that go into what is the big deal, which is wealth building. All of those things are cut off when you have these types of policies in place. Louisville was literally the blueprint for that. And then they picked it up from Louisville and they went to places like Chicago and down south and all over the country with it once they figured out that it would work here. But this city has never made amends for that. They've acknowledged it. They said, like, yeah, it happened and it's a tragedy and all that sort of stuff, but we ain't got no reparations. The Black folks here have gotten no type of redress for what has happened over the decades for that. So you can't be talking about, I'm going to lead the effort on reparations for the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and still here in your city, you've done nothing to address what has happened as a result of these types of policies in your own city. So that's a huge issue for us, is just starting with the mayor. But I can go on that.
Yeah, well, something that is that I've been talking to other activists about is, and it was brought up on this panel that I was speaking on, and it's about candidate incubators and preparing candidates to run, instead of just us kind of sitting on our hands and hoping that the Democratic Party or the Republican Party chooses the appropriate people to run. To me, it's like, we see what happened in Colorado. Those people are Democrats, and they're allowing the foolishness to happen with Elijah McClain. And what can we do if those are the Democratic people in office and they're not even treating they're not even doing what the Democratic Party stands for. It's kind of like, oh, well then what do we do now? That was the only candidate we had, you know, he ran unopposed. So what do you feel like your organization or other people can do to push other people that they feel will be great for that position, to push them to run and to kind of groom people to run for certain positions, especially like the mayor of Louisville, so we don't have to just sit by and let other people choose.
Right. So this is where I have to put out the disclaimer that the Louisville Urban League is a nonpartisan organization. And so we are only for those who are for us, whether you Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever. And so that said, though, I mean, I think, and being honest, we haven't here in Louisville, we haven't waded into that water in terms of candidate preparation and making sure that candidates are ready. The National Urban League, particularly through their Washington Bureau, is doing some of that work. They've got some certificate programs to kind of train people on like how to get engaged in policy work and understanding it a little bit better. But I think everybody could do better in terms of everybody in the movement could be a lot better in doing exactly what you just said, really prepping people to fill these spots, and not just new blood, but also for the folks who are already there. Like, what are those candidates who are in place doing to prepare folks to come in behind them, right? Like, what's Auntie Maxine doing, right? Like, who is behind her? And maybe she has, obviously, I'm not in California, so I'm hoping she's got a roster of folks who are ready to replace her when the time comes to fill that spot and to keep pushing the same way. But even for those new folks, whether it's Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib or AOC or whoever, like, are they building up just kind of a stable of folks to be able to go out? And I know there are some initiatives that are doing this nationally that are working to build up progressive leaders, but it is so critically important because I think, like, going back to our college conversation, like, I think that is the thing that we failed at, right? And not just us, but all the generations before us, is that we had no succession plan, right? Like, so we had all these dynamic leaders who were doing these things and who started these issues, but we really did very little to prepare somebody to come behind us to actually continue the work, right? And honestly, the system is designed to do that. Particularly in higher education, that's the way the system is built. They just wait you out and say, like, oh, okay, we'll just have the same conversation with the next group 4 years later. And then, it's just rinse and repeat as far as the institution is concerned. But we didn't do a great job of doing that. And I think we have to look at that at the national, state, and local levels to say, like, all right, how are we preparing people to go into these positions? But then even once they're there, how are you creating a bank of people who are ready to come in different spots to be able to step in and lead and do this work?
We're not always starting at square one.
Exactly. Continuing the work, right? Like, that is the key part of this, is how do you prepare people to come in and continue what you're doing so that they are not building from square one, but they are literally standing on top of whatever foundation was there before them so that we can keep moving this thing forward. And so as much as we can support that, I know that is something that we want to do. I know that it's something that the National Urban League is supportive of. And like I said, I know there are organizations doing that work. But we need it at every level, in every state and municipality, because it's going to be important, because we can't do this without folks, leading this work. Like, as much as, some folks keep talking about the revolution, like, we not trying to be the French over here. Like, we, like, folks ain't got fat and comfortable. Like, we not going to burn this whole thing down. Right. So I think we got to be realistic about the fact that a lot of the change is going to happen within the very system that we have. And if that's going to be the case, then folks got to be prepared to step in and lead within the context of those systems, so that then they can change them.
Let's talk about, it's such a big topic, but whatever. Let's talk about voter suppression, because if we're going to keep pushing for these candidates to get into office, I mean, pushing them to get there is one thing, but actually making sure they have a fair chance of getting in is a whole other. So Kentucky, of course, had their primary that was much talked about. And the senatorial election the senatorial race was quite interesting. I mean, a lot of us were pulling for Charles Booker, of course, and he's one of the most vocal people going against Mitch McConnell and everybody else that is whack and trash in that state, you know? And it was just interesting to me that it shouldn't have been that interesting that it was that close of a race, but whatever, here we are, it's America. I do think it should have been a landslide, or at least not as close as it was, and he still lost. So let's talk about why he lost and what we can do for the upcoming November general election. He, of course, this was a Democratic primary that I'm talking about, and he had, I know at least, the winner, Amy, but I don't know how many other people were in the race. But it was just interesting to me that, I'm all the way over here in New Jersey. Everybody I know all over the country knew Charles Booker and was voting for Charles Booker, whether you were black, white, whatever. Mm-hmm. And it's just interesting to me that this woman came out of nowhere. And I understand that she's a military vet, right? Mm-hmm. And she's probably an amazingly qualified person, but I'd never heard her speaking up against people like Mitch. I never heard it. So that's not somebody that I was hoping would get into office, because believe it or not, as you all know, if you're watching this, just because you're the senator of one state does not mean you do not affect like literally everybody else in this country. So we're all invested in who wins from every state. So it was disappointing to see that we want someone in office who's going to speak on our behalf, even over here in New Jersey. Like, I want you to be doing what you're doing in Kentucky and forming bills that can still affect my life over here in Jersey. So it's sad to see that he didn't, even get to the point that I feel like it was stripped from him. And I feel like it was stripped because of voter suppression. So the day of election, and I didn't realize this, but I realized it like a few days before, that they basically condensed all the polls into one for that one huge area for like over 600,000.
Yeah, where we are, Jefferson County.
For the one county, right. Mm-hmm. Which, listen, I live in a small city outside of New York, and we had multiple polls, even in this COVID era, even while they were pushing for mail-in voting, we still had multiple in-person locations. So having one and saying, well, we told y'all to vote online, or we told y'all to vote by mail last week, it just seems very dismissive, and it seems very intentional. And then the people that were going to that one polling station, the lines were out the parking lot, wrapped down the highway and all this stuff at 7:00 when polls closed. And it's like, what are we doing? So, and of course that was the district that was heavily, heavily progressive and heavily black. Mm-hmm. What are we doing about it? What can we do? Because it's like, we had a great candidate, but he didn't have a fair chance. So what do we do?
So that is Jefferson County. That is where I am, where we're located. And I can provide some context, because I won't completely throw the state under the bus.
All right.
Right. So part of what happened was, a few different things happened. Mm-hmm. In terms of Jefferson County, why they decided to condense to one. One of the official reasons is that due to fears of COVID, mm-hmm. they lost a lot of poll volunteers. And so you've been to elections, and poll volunteers are usually older citizens who are just doing the best they can. And they said, no, we're not doing this. So a lot of folks apparently said that they weren't. So that was going to already cause a whole lot of polling locations to be closed, simply because they just didn't have the volunteers. Now, caveat to that is, I don't know what push they made to get more volunteers who might have been willing.
What do we do about it? Right.
But that's what they said. All right. So understanding that, they're going to close it down, and they used the Expo Center here in Louisville. One of the other things they did, though, was they opened up early voting at the election center, and at even some remote places. You could come and turn in your mail-in ballot if you had one. You come do that in person for I think it was 3.5 weeks leading up to the election. And so the Secretary of State and the governor felt like that, in addition to everybody was eligible for mail-in voting, was going to be sufficient to be able to ensure that folks were going to be able to vote and vote on time. And so those steps, I will say, were major steps for Kentucky. because prior to that, there was no early voting, and mail-in was only an option in very narrow circumstances or very narrow situations. You literally had to basically be out of the county on election day and be able to prove that, and some other types of things. So, like, they had taken some massive steps forward in terms of opening up voting. However, they did not do that in really considering all of the things, all of the situations that folks may face. One, during early voting, the polls still closed early. Yeah. And while it is policy that employers are supposed to allow their employees off to go vote, if you were somebody who lives on the other side of town and does not have transportation and has to get on a bus, how you gonna do that, right? Like you're not gonna be able to make that commute out to get your vote and get back to work in time. And so that's not necessarily an option for everybody. It doesn't feel like it is the best option. On the mail-in side, the process they had was real convoluted at the start was really convoluted, hard to understand, and just difficult. And then there were issues with the mail. So folks who had turned it in. So even in my house, I got my ballot, and even though my partner and I, we both put our information in at the same time, she never got hers. And so, like, it's just mass confusion around how is this happening and what's supposed to happen, when is my ballot coming, and all of that sort of stuff. So there were some major glitches in the system that, again, led to what we would essentially say is effectively voter suppression. And then on election day, the polling place they had, which was large enough, more than large enough to accommodate the number of people that they have. But the issue is that there's huge amounts of construction around it. So that caused traffic delays. We had instances in which Lyft provided us with free rides for folks to go and get votes. It was great. But because just to get into the election center and drop people off, it was taking so much longer, because the way the Lyft ride worked is basically it's a voucher for a certain amount of time that should cover your ride. Mm-hmm. Well, the Lyft drivers started seeing that, oh no, this doesn't cover the duration of my time. It's taking way longer than that for me to drop people off. And so we had Lyft drivers who basically just shut off service and weren't picking people up, right? So again, all of these things go into this idea of like, how are you suppressing votes? And then for whatever reason, the polls were closed at 6. Which didn't make any sense, because it's like you already knew that you had to count all these mail-in ballots. Right. And so it was going to be a week until afterwards. So you could have left the polls open until midnight. It really didn't matter. Like, why are you closing the polls early on election day when you know you're not going to have a count today and you won't have it for more than a week later? So all of those things happen. And so how do we fix it? So there are a couple of things. Number one, we as the Urban League, we sued the state to basically say, look, we want mail-in voting for everybody. That is still working its way through, but it doesn't look like we're going to get it for everybody, but we still should have pretty expanded voting.
Well, before you go on, what is the difference? Can you explain the difference? I think it's a little different by state, even though it shouldn't be, but what is the difference between the mail-in and the absentee?
So, I mean, they're essentially the same ballot, but absentee ballot is basically that. It says you will be absent on election day, therefore you need to submit your vote by mail. Mm. And so there are some conditions as to why you will need to be absent on election day, which in the past, like I said, was very, very narrow what those things were. And so that has been, so for the primary, it was open to everybody. Like you didn't need a reason. Basically, you just say COVID-19 and that was your reason. And then for the fall or for November, it's going to be more narrow, but it's not going to be as narrow as it's been in the past. And so there will be a lot more people who are able to get fill out a mail-in ballot or absentee ballot.
Okay. All right. And what else is being done?
Yes. So we're suing the state. And hoping we were pushing for all mail-in ballots for that to be the same case as it was for the primary. We probably won't get that, but we will get expanded mail-in balloting. So that'll be a good thing. It looks like they will open more polling locations. I don't know what those polling locations will be, how many there will be, but it does sound like there will be more polling locations. And it does sound like we're going to get early voting again. For possibly as much as 4 weeks in advance. All really, really good things. What we want to push for within that, though, is going to be extended times. I would like to see early voting on Saturdays, because that was the other thing. It was only Monday through Friday. I would like to see early voting be available on Saturdays for folks to be able to do it. And then on election day, we definitely want to see extended polling hours, because we'll be in the same situation again. They're not going to know results on the day of the election. So just leave the polls open, let people get in there and go vote. Like, why are you going to put people under a gun to get in there and exercise their right? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. So.
Well, do you think that, what's her last name? Amy, what's her last name?
McGrath.
McGrath, yes. Mm-hmm. Do we think that Amy McGrath can beat Mitch McConnell?
So, again, Louisville Urban League's nonpartisan organization. It's possible. Just me. It's gonna be hard, right? And I'll say that in terms of the why for that is, so during the primary, I think you talked about, not hearing from Amy early on, and she was in the race well before Charles was. Charles actually got in the race pretty late.
Yes.
But she had already kind of been aligned with what we would typically call the quote unquote establishment of the Democratic Party. And their playbook for Kentucky for a long time has just been like, be as center right as you possibly can to try and sway some of these, Republican voters over your way. Like that's kind of the way in which they have coached candidates for a very long time, and certainly since I've been here, has been kind of their push. It's like, if you just stay center right, then there'll be some folks who give you a look, and you may be able to siphon off enough votes. But time after time, like Mitch McConnell, like crushes people, right? Like it's not like he's just barely winning. Like he's out here just killing folks when it comes to the polls. And I think a lot of it has to do with you get candidates who don't want to rock the boat, in terms of like coming out here and really connecting with people. And I think that was something that was very different about Charles Booker as he was running, is like, and not just for Black people, right? Like he went all over the state and really made an authentic push about how, the hoods of Louisville and Lexington are no different than, the hollers, as they call them, out in Eastern and Western Kentucky, right? Like we have so much more that binds us. And that type of authentic message, I think, registered with lots and lots of people. And I think what you have in terms of what Amy is ultimately going to fight again is that there's just been a big letdown. I think for a lot of folks, people are just disaffected with the choices. And I mean, I think we can see this at the national level as well, right? Like there are just a lot of folks who like, the people at the top of the ticket just aren't my favorite, right? Like there's no shade. It's just like,
okay. No energy. They're not
right. Yeah. It's just, this ain't what change looks like, right? Like that is a valid point. Yeah, and that's, for a lot of folks in our generation, particularly a lot of Black folks, like that is what it is. And that is what we are seeing a lot of folks who are out here in the streets protesting. Is like, man, that ain't it. I ain't with it. And so if we can't get those folks to turn out to vote, and if Amy can't convince those people to vote for her in particular, it's going to be a real hard sell. For her to do something with that. Because one of the things that I think folks miss particularly on Black people, like I think there's this assumption that Black people just vote against people, right? But the reality is that for most of us, we are trying to vote for something, right?
Yes.
Now, at the end of the day, like for a lot of us, we recognize that there is just a degree of necessity that like, all right, I gotta vote for, the devil, the lesser of two evils. Unfortunately, and we will do that. But we really want to vote for somebody. And so we are looking for people to give us something to vote for, as opposed to just simply giving us something to vote against. And so
that's why I wanted Booker in there. I feel like he would have been the perfect energizer to actually, I mean, you're nonpartisan, but I'm partisan. and to get Mitch up out of there. And we all know why. If you don't go to at YBF Politics, we explain the positions of senators and the role they play in the BS that we see happening. So he's got to get the F ASAP. And I think that the one person that could have done that is the newcomer. Same thing that AOC is doing on the national level, same thing that Ayanna Pressley is doing on the national level. Even the newcomer, Cori Bush, I think she's about to come in here and wreck shop on the national level. It takes energizers like that to buck the system. It's cool to have Nancy Pelosi because she is the OG, and cool to have Maxine Waters because they know the rules backwards and forwards and can flip it around and play everybody without anybody even noticing. But you also need that other component of somebody to buck the system. And I think that would be Booker, but here we are. So I don't know. Good luck to Amy and all. Oh no. What do you feel about, did you see that this is the last thing I want to talk about with Mitch McConnell because I'm over it. But did you see that? Let me pull it up. Oh, okay. It was Kentucky people outside of his office singing Mitch Better Have My Money, all about they were mad about him blocking the stimulus, the new stimulus package where people would have gotten money, you know? I think it's hilarious. But what do you feel about what's happening when it comes to the stimulus package and how it's affecting the people there?
I mean, it's criminal, right? Like, we out here playing with folks' money in ways that, I mean, and it's, I mean, obviously, it's stuff that's always happened. It's nothing new, but in this particular situation, when you compound it with what people are up against, right? Like, you got a lot of states now that are starting to open up eviction court, that are allowing their utility companies now to start turning off service and all that sort of stuff. So now you're really putting people up against, you know, homelessness, you know, against food insecurity, lots of different things. And so you out here, you know, playing politics with folks' livelihoods in ways in which that are far less subtle than I think they've ever been before, right? Like, usually it's kind of nuanced when we talk about tax cuts for, you know, the wealthy and those types of things, ways in which those things which obviously still take away from the folks who need it. But it's hard to see, right? Like, it can be hard to pinpoint unless you really understand what happened in the policy and whatnot. But this is very, very clear when the man says, like, yeah, y'all just gonna stop getting these unemployment benefits, or we're gonna cut them by $400, which they were already only $600 to begin with, and then my rent is $780 a month. Like, what are we talking about? What you talking about, right? Like, how does that work? And so, yeah, I mean, it's truly criminal that we would be playing with folks' livelihoods, folks' humanity, in this way. Because I mean, it's not just grown people. Not that somehow makes it better, but you're talking about families. You're talking about kids who are now supposed to be, you know, trying to figure out how I'm going to go to school online, or in some places go to school in person. But, you know, mom and daddy sitting at home because they've been laid off due to COVID and can't afford to make ends meet in real ways. Like, the things that we are doing, like I've been saying to people in lots of different calls, like, the generational effects that this time is going to have on us, right? Like, the story is not going to be told. I don't care if there's a vaccine tomorrow. Like, the impact generationally, when you talk about economics, when you talk about wealth building, when you talk about health-wise, when you talk about mental health, and when you talk about education, like, the generational impact of COVID-19 is going to be significant. And so we really have to be paying attention to what is happening and start figuring out how we start to remedy some of these things.
And I'm glad you brought that up about education. I was actually just watching a parent in California speak about the fact that this large group of parents that came together with a lawyer and is suing the California governor because they're upset that he's not allowing certain districts that have met a threshold or above of COVID infections to go back to in-person school. And now, as we know, California is a large ass state with a lot of people. And so, yeah, the district when we say district, we're thinking a little bit smaller. For them, that includes one district could be 3 million people. Mm-hmm. So to them, they feel like they're being kind of penalized if their side of town is damn near COVID free, but they can't send their kids back to school because their district is above the threshold. So now the parents are stuck like Chuck. Like, what do they do? So I get it. And I've been telling, I don't have kids, so I can't really speak to it, but I tell all my friends with kids and my sister and, who's going through all of this. I'm like, honestly, because I see the hardship and I see like the stress and the impossibility, because as a parent, I'm sure, like you're trying to find the right answer. Why would you not, And I'm trying to tell them, I don't think there's a right answer. I think that the position that this administration has put this country in is a rock and a hard place. There is no one right answer that's going to solve things and make things better. Whether they stay home 100%, stay home only 50%, or go to school 100%, it doesn't matter. They're going to be affected negatively in some way, shape, or form. So at this point, it's just about managing the chaos and and doing the best you can do. But like you said, it's still going to have this effect, because the mother that was talking was saying her kids have special needs. So she's already seen, this has only been 4 to 5 months, she's already seeing the regression in her children, because certain children with certain special needs, they're just not going to be able to flourish in an at-home environment. Mm-hmm. So she is put in a place, like, what can she possibly do if the state is like, y'all ain't going back to school. Right. Y'all don't care if there's no COVID on your block. Mm-hmm. And I empathize, because I'm just like, I don't even know what to tell you. I get why you're suing the state, but I also know if we don't all sit the hell down, this will continue like this, nonstop. So what do we do? Like, what, and also, do you feel like it's part of the Urban League's, I don't want to say role, but is there any way that they could help with certain, because we all know this is also a socioeconomic issue as well. Mm-hmm. So is there any way that the Urban League and different divisions are helping certain people in certain socioeconomic states or situations that can't afford to send their kid to a pod and, sit at home with their kid? Like, how are we helping people in an impossible situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think for our part, so we have a director of education policy and programs, Dr. Kishkumi Price, who's a rock star, who has been working with JCPS, our local school district, to do whatever she can to kind of advocate for like smart solutions, right? Like, and making sure that they are keeping at the forefront of their mind, like, this is not some one size fits all type of solution. Like, that we are not, this thing is very, very real in different ways for lots of people, that is beyond like the physical health and well-being that is associated with this virus, right? And I think that's the thing that, at least for a while, was kind of lost on people, is that, for Black communities in particular, like, yeah, the health risks associated with COVID are real, and that's significant, but all these other risks, like the economic risks, the social risks, the educational risks, all those types of things, like that is the bigger.
Yeah, so in the next generation, like how?
So, so for our part, like, we've been pushing the district and working with the district, and they've been fairly responsive in working with us, and we're glad to have their partnership to try to find as many solutions as possible. And so there's a community solution that's kind of a pods type of thing that is coming about here. Okay. And so there's some groups trying to put that together to figure out if they can make that work, and hopefully the district is going to support that, not just with financial resources, but hopefully provide some human resources to be able to make that work. But you're right, there aren't any really good solutions, and this is where, like, leadership just matters, right? On a whole host of fronts, because back when, for us, school, basically they came out of school back in mid-March, right? It would seem to me that at that point in time, and that was a lot of districts across the nation, that at that time that would have been the time for folks to start figuring out, like, okay, what does this look like long term?
That's what I said.
And what do you need in order to get right? And so while we're talking about stimulus, and while we're talking, because now is the time, only in the last month has the government federally and otherwise really been talking about stimulus to schools and education, and that's simply just so they can get back, right? And it's like,
well, they thought it was going to be over. That's why. Oh, it's going to be over in August. It's
exactly
fine.
right. Like, we're trying to figure out, you know, they out here trying to force stuff so that they can have football, and silly stuff like that. Whereas, like, had you just had folks sitting around a table intentionally looking at the rest of the world who had already done this, and some of those schools who went back and looking to see, like, okay, how are they doing it? How does this work? What do you need? What are the types of resources? And then bringing all of those resources to bear in the name of education. Like, we might have had a conversation. We might be able to have a conversation where kids who absolutely need to be in person could actually be in person right now in certain places. Because even in the places that they're doing it, like as we saw in Georgia, like they doing it in ways that just don't seem particularly safe. Like a whole bunch of kids in the hallway, jam-packed on top of each other, all kinds of stuff. So it's just like, had we really just been intentionally thinking about it, had you had the leadership to really be thinking about what this means long term and what this could look like, what are the possibilities, what are the options, and how much does that cost? Because that's ultimately the big question. How much does that cost? We might be in a situation where this fall, all right, we could be managing this a lot differently, but we lacked leadership,
foresight.
From so many different levels, that now everybody's just kind of under the gun and just continuing to make poor decisions, frankly. Like, everybody just out here making bad decisions.
Shut down that school that, you know, that they suspended the kid for taking a picture of the crazy hallway. Now they had to shut it down because like 100, 200 students or something were infected. And it's like, really, y'all, really?
Yeah, like how, like that wasn't a surprise. Like, how did y'all not know that this is what was going to happen? Yeah. But again, like, we are lacking leadership in real ways in lots of places, and folks who just seem to refuse to want to accept what science says, who don't want to accept, just kind of what is happening around the world, as if they can make up results. On their own. It's just crazy. It's really amazing.
What are you doing? Like, your dad. So how do you feel? Like, what can you do? Like, how do you feel about this? I know, like, at least one of your kids is school age, I believe.
Yep. So she's supposed to be starting kindergarten this year. And she is going to do that virtually. That is what our district is doing.
That should be fun.
Like, again, like, what does a kindergartner do on a screen? Like, it's just like, so we have no idea, to be very honest with you. We have no idea what this is going to look like. And she's brilliant. Like, she's smart, and
I'm sure.
She's going to be fine, like, in the long run. But she also has the benefit of a whole host of privileges that, a lot of kids don't have. Both of her parents are able and blessed to be able to work at home. And so we're both there. And so even though we're working full time, which is in and of itself like its own type of grind and strain to just be doing this all day, having to be on Zoom calls all day, having to be on all kinds of different things all day. That's taxing and that's stressful for her as well. And again, we've noticed that is a stress on her not having our attention. But she's got tons of resources. She's also got a grandmother and two aunts who are educators and who have taken time to pour into her in all kinds of different ways, and they're sending us tips and resources. And so, like, she's one of those kids who just has the benefit of privilege in some ways that we'll make it through this year okay. But every educator that I've talked to who's serious about it says, like, there is no replacement for in-person learning, right? Absolutely. And so every student, like, is probably going to be taking some level of a step back, no matter how good their district is doing. And so we just have to really be thinking about, so again, like, right now is the time that you have to think about, like, okay, next summer or next fall, what do we do, right? Like, we have a whole bunch of students who did this whole remote thing, and some of them might have learned, some of them might not. Like, how are we gonna treat them, right? Like, what are we gonna do to make sure that they actually, get that learning?
Well, you saw that some of the colleges are getting rid of ACT and SAT and stuff like that. Do you think that that's helpful?
Yeah, that's always been helpful, but that's because those tests are racist, right? Like,
That's how you think.
like
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's one less burden that those kids have to deal with. But I mean, those tests just had problematic, issues from the jump, and so I don't see that as an answer to COVID.
Okay.
That was just something that needed to happen because
regardless,
the tests themselves got problems. So. I mean, I did fairly well on the SAT, but I can still say it's very problematic.
I know. And you also have a master's in higher education, right? So, I mean, I think that, definitely your kids will be fine. But like you said, you can also look at it from an educator standpoint and be like, yeah, they're fine, but like there's still going to be something missing, and it's unfair. It's
unfair. And I mean, and when I say like the other piece of this is beyond the academics is like the social emotional well-being of kids, like what it's like to be isolated. And you notice like we all understand this now, like being socially isolated, being in a place where essentially, like I describe it as Groundhog Day every day, right? You wake up and the day pretty much looks the same, no matter how different it may seem on your calendar. It's pretty much the same day. You in the same space, looking at the same things, essentially doing the same thing. Like that type of psychological. That is real. And like I said, I mean, we've seen that with both my kids. I mean, and my son is younger, but even in him, but certainly in his sister who's 5, right? Like we have seen the toll that it's taking on her, just kind of doing this monotonous stuff time in and time out. And so that's going to be an entire generation of kids who have done this. And even if it is just for 6 months, 7 months, or whatever this ends up being, that impact is just going to sit there. Like that is a type of trauma that they're going to have to deal with at some point. And if we're not prepared to help them deal with it, it's just going to persist. And so that's why I like leadership in terms of thinking about like, how do we get around this as we come out of it? Is going to be critical.
Absolutely. Well, I don't want to keep you all day, but I do want to talk about college football. So.
Okay.
Okay. Lord, it's such a complicated situation. All right. So to preface this, college football is broken into multiple conferences. There are some conferences that have been like, we done for the season. Like they already said it early on. SWAC, the HBCUs were like, nope, we done for the season. They said that early on. We're not going to be playing football. Just yesterday, I believe, the Big Ten confirmed that they are not doing a football season right now. They're hoping that they can do it in the spring. So Big Ten is a big effing conference. So it's kind of like, okay, well, if the Big Ten isn't participating this fall, then how, if you think about it, even if the SEC, which our school is a part of, and, all the other conferences, Big 12 and everybody else do stuff, that still affects the national championship rankings. It still affects everything if there's a whole entire huge conference that is not included. So the whole debate is, do you play or do you not? And I totally see both sides of the issue. Because once again, just like with school age kids, not higher education, but school age, there's no real right answer. So yes, some students are going back to school in person, but should they be playing football or even training for basketball? I don't know. So there are those people. I'm sure you saw the tweets of the one guy. I wrote it down, but I don't even feel like trying to find his name, y'all. But there was one football player at University of Kentucky, I believe. I'm gonna look, but he was talking about how he wants to play. He said they started a whole hashtag, we want to play. And he gave a really, I don't 100% agree with what he's saying, but I actually love how he structured this, especially as a college student. He laid out points about why it would be detrimental to not play. And there are some students, a lot of students actually, that can't go home, and can't, football is their escape. Going away to school is their escape from their neighborhood, from their family, from a toxic situation, and also a ticket to somewhere else. Like they need to play football in order to better themselves and their families. The other side of that is, hell, what are we going to do next year and the year after if they want to enter the draft? So how does that affect the NFL draft now? It's just a whole ripple and domino effect that I totally understand why these kids are like, look, I've been working for this since youth league, like since youth football, like, you're not going to take this from me. I get it. And it's unfair that they have to go through this. The other side of this is I actually did copy his statement. A Black football player who he wrote, his name is Kylan Hill. He goes to Mississippi State, and he's one of a pretty big player and a top prospect to get drafted. He said, "I don't want to go home for a reason. Everybody home. Hometown is not peaceful. Hometown is not peaceful. People get killed every day and every week in my city. I get it. You know, I understand that. Now, whether or not they can actually stay on campus, like, does this mean even if they don't have football, they have to go home? I'm not sure how that's going to work. But then there's, students that are like, I'm not trying to put my life at risk for y'all. Y'all don't even care about my life when there's not a pandemic. So they feel like the school and the powers that be are not doing everything in their power to make the situation safe. I believe them. They probably aren't. We see how the NFL and the MLB aren't using all their resources to do the right thing either. What is the damn answer? What do we do, and whose side are you taking, especially because this is your thing with higher education? You know the ins and outs of the politics of that. What is going on?
So what's going on is hard to say. Like, I've been following it because I've got some friends who work in athletic departments at different places around the country, and so I've been paying attention to it somewhat, but I can't say that I'm in too deep. But what I think you basically have is a situation where, let's just take the Power 5 conferences. So the big conferences, the Big 12, Big 10, SEC, ACC, and then the Pac-12. So the Big 10 and the Pac-12 have decided no season. And what it sounds like those university presidents got together and recognized was a couple things. One, we're not sure that up and down the board, everybody can meet the same standards. And part of the reason everybody can't meet the same standards is because this stuff costs a whole lot of money. So if you want to talk about testing and all that sort of stuff, like, people just throw around testing kind of willy-nilly as if it's no big thing. Like, oh, just test people. Yeah, all those tests cost money. So every single test. You don't think they got money now? Not all those schools. No, not all them schools got money. Like, some of the schools, the big schools, absolutely have money, which is why you have schools like Ohio State and Michigan and others who are kind of out front, like, hey, we ready to play. Like, we gonna do it because they got money. But you got other schools in there who are like, I don't know where you expect me to pay this from. Like, that's just like, we ain't got that.
And the NCAA can't step in and cover.
Huh?
The NCAA couldn't come in and be like, we got it.
Well, I mean, they probably could and should chip in to help a lot, but to cover all of those programs, they probably don't even have enough money to do it and still exist. Which, I mean, the NCAA's existence and why they're there and how much profit that's a whole nother conversation, right? Like, we could do that on a different level. And so I think money is a huge part of it, but I do think that there are some schools and school presidents and athletic directors who are also genuinely concerned about, like, the health and safety. So, number one, football is a contact sport. And so if somebody on that field is playing, the likelihood that they could pass it to somebody else, very, very high. Because if you just talk about linemen in general, like, every single play, they are face to face with another player. And so the idea that somehow they would not be rapidly spreading this is just asinine. Like, they would absolutely spread it very, very quickly playing the game of football. And so when you think about that and you think about the long-term effects that people are finding with this, because again, a lot of people have made this argument like, oh, they're young, they're healthy, they'll live. Yes, you will live. But if you develop lung issues, breathing issues, heart issues as a result of it, as we have seen in younger people, then you are setting yourself up for a situation where that person is potentially debilitated long-term in life, or may die later as a result of it, particularly if they continue to engage in a high activity sport like football. So they've made the decision to just, no, we're not finna do that right now until we can get to a place where we can. And honestly, in terms of where I come down on it, like, that seems like the most reasonable decision to me, because while I understand for all those athletes, and there are absolutely athletes who are going to get screwed as a result of this, because there are those handful of athletes who their senior year is the year when they make it, and you know they had a breakout season, and that propels them to get into the NFL or to get drafted, and then they go on to have a successful multi-million-dollar career in the NFL. Like, there are going to be those athletes who absolutely won't get that chance as a result of COVID. I'm not denying that at all, but this is one of those times where we have to talk about, you know, as is often the cliche, like there being no I in team. Like, this can't be about, you know, that handful of individual players. Because again, the draft is 300 and some odd players. There are 300 and some odd players who get drafted into the NFL every year. And then, you know, a good chunk of those end up getting cut and never make a roster.
Yeah.
There are literally tens of thousands of college athletes. When you take all of the conferences together in all sports, you're talking about tens of thousands of college athletes. Like, why are we risking all of these folks' lives for the sake of, you know, a handful of folks who may have the opportunity to make it out? And that is hard. That is a really, really tough thing to say to that young man who may be on the cusp of going out and making all that money. Yeah. But like, there's just really no logical justification for it if we're just going to take it on the facts. Now, where all of this does take me to, and I think the conversation has to get to pretty quickly, though, is how are we compensating athletes, right? Like, because we out here asking athletes for our own benefit and glorification to come out here and be able to watch football, as well as for the paychecks of these universities to come out here and risk their lives, and they ain't really getting paid, right? Like, so
you've always had that stand, and I think me and you definitely have always debated that. I never believed in athletes being paid. I just never believed it. I don't agree with it. I'm slowly coming around.
Look, if they finna say you got to come out here and play football, that tells me that you are an essential employee, and employees get paid, right? Like, so, like, what are we talking about in terms of compensation?
What if they have scholarships? Most of them do.
Many of them do, not all, many of them do. But the thing is, like, here's why I've always rejected the scholarship argument, is because me being in school is what I have to do to get it in order to play, right? Like, it ain't like I can just sit at home and then show up on Saturday and come play football. I have to be in school. It's a requirement. And so you need me to have a scholarship, because otherwise I wouldn't be here, right? Like, so it's a necessity type of thing. You ain't giving me anything. Essentially, that is my pass in. Otherwise, like, I couldn't be here anyway. And so the idea that, we give you a scholarship, like, that's what you needed me to have in order for me to be here to play for you. So, like, that's not something you've gifted me. That it benefits you as much as it benefits me. And it only benefits me as if I'm able to access all of the things that come with being a student, which we know very well. A lot of our football friends did not have full access to everything that the collegiate experience offers. We know that firsthand. There are a whole bunch of them boys who had absolutely no idea what else was happening on campus, and that was by design. Not to mention just the academic part of it.
Yeah, they stayed in one specific dorm room, Kane Hall, or dorm building. They weren't even allowed to, like, come to parties. You know, like, it was just so segregated.
Right.
So, yeah.
So I think that for me is going to be the bigger conversation in this, is how does student athlete voice grow?
But isn't that becoming the conversation? Because I have to watch First Take every now and then just to know what's happening. You know, I'm not the, like, let me tune in sports girl, but I'm trying to keep up. So Stephen A. was talking about something about how he feels like that's why the conversation took a turn, is because student athletes started saying, oh, you want us to come back and play? Pay me. And I think that they start to feel that pressure, and it started to make a lot more sense to the masses. So that's when they just said, we're going to stop talking to students and just make them come back and kind of just pivot the conversation. Do you think that that's kind of what's happening? Because that conversation is definitely happening again.
Oh, I absolutely think, like, because what the Pac-12 has done in terms of those athletes getting together and banding together, and even the Big Ten, and they don't seem as unified as the Pac-12 students are. But the fact that students are starting to get together and recognize that they have power,
right?
Like, that's the end of this whole thing,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
Like
one of them
now,
was saying that he wants to form the first football player I was talking about. He was saying he wants to form a players association just like the NFL has. I'm not opposed to that. I'm never opposed to people joining together. Of course, they're going to be pissed about that. So yeah, I don't know. Well, I guess my last question about that is there any way, kind of like with middle school and grammar school and high school, is there any way that the Urban League can help with students, especially at like University of Kentucky, Kentucky State, places like that, help these students that say, I don't know what's going to happen at those universities when it comes to whether or not they're going to be allowed to stay on campus if they're not playing football. Like, do they have special dorms, or I don't know. I don't know the housing situation or even the stipend and money situation. I have no idea. Like, how you going to eat if you don't have, your scholarship is not applying this year, then do you still get the benefits of the scholarship this year? I don't know. So is there any way that they can receive assistance in some way or help in some way, whether it's financial or guidance, anything that certain students of a socioeconomic status that need that type of help, can they come to somebody like you guys?
Yeah, and we've helped some students already this year who are going back and who need assistance. And there are other organizations who that is their focus, is helping college students kind of stay afloat. And so, yes, so they certainly can seek out the Urban League, and we can contact them. We can either help them directly, or we can put them in contact with others who can. But I'll tell you, the first place that I always double back to is we always go back to the college, because this was the other thing that we, you and I learned being connected as we were, is like, it's pockets of money sitting around campus all the time, right? That just don't get access, that just to help students to be able to do a little bit here, pay rent there, do that sort of stuff. And so schools have to do a better job of making those things more clear and more accessible for a lot of their students. But that is particularly when we get college students, we always say, like, all right, let's call your school and let's go and shake some trees and figure out what's going to fall out there, because they already have resources that they should be deploying to help you. And you shouldn't have to come, all the way back home to Louisville, if you're not in town, to try to figure out like how you're going to get assistance, because we know that these universities are set up to help students in those types of situations. And so we do our best to connect them to the resources at their institution. But then after that, we absolutely step in and do what we can to help kids succeed.
Love it. Love it. So there you go, guys. If you have kids that are in college, or, you're in college, I don't know. Now you know where to go get your resources and get your help and where to start. All right. Last question. How do we feel about the new VP nominee, Kamala Harris? How do we think this presidential election is going to play out? How are we going to prevent voter suppression in that way as well? What are your last feelings on this?
So, all right. So we talked a little bit about the voter suppression issue. I think we just got to make sure that at every state level and municipality that we are beating the drum, that we are ringing the bell anywhere that suppression is popping up, and that we are making that as public as humanly possible. I think all the organizations on the ground need to be doing their best to get voters to turn out. Like, turnout is going to be the critical part to this. And so we've got to have folks turn out. I know folks are, disaffected. Some folks are just not satisfied, but folks have to turn out and exercise their right. And they need to do so not just because, of how you feel about the person in the White House, but honestly, one of the things that is been, I think, picked up in me has been this idea of, and I think John Lewis's passing just kind of triggered it, because I learned a lot more about the push to vote than I already knew. And I knew a little bit, but I learned a lot more just in reading things after he passed. And there's just too much legacy in this, right? Like, there are too many people who have done too much for us to sit at home. And that and that's just, and that for me is just the big piece on that. Now, to turn into our dear sister Kamala, look, I am waiting on all of the flood of think pieces to come.
They literally an hour later.
It's going to be amazing. But here's where I am. Like, I will not stand for anybody who's going to question her blackness,
Yes.
or her authenticity, or her womanhood, or her Black womanhood in any of this, right? And so all of those things, I will absolutely stand up, applaud, and celebrate all day long, right? Because that is important, that is significant, and that is an achievement that we absolutely deserve, that Black women absolutely deserve, that our country deserves, and I will honor that every day, all day.
Love it.
Now, the reality is we're gonna have to see from a policy position where she stands up, and there are a lot of folks in California who got their own issues with her and her past, and I think some of that is absolutely valid. But what we're not gonna do is somehow examine her under a microscope that we ain't finna put everybody else on, right? Like that is something that I think happened in the primary, that I think was just complete bullshit, right? Like I think we decided that we were going to treat her differently than we're gonna treat everybody else on that stage. And that is true of Black people as much as it was the media and everybody else. And I would say that was true of the women first and foremost, but certainly her as a Black woman got an extra layer of scrutiny that nobody else got. And so we ain't finna do that sort of thing, right? Like we can have an honest intellectual conversation about what's good, what's bad, but we ain't finna just be dismissing folks on nonsense and on some BS that we're not willing to hold, or some BS standards that we're not willing to hold everybody else to. And so that is where I am. I am still figuring out, where from a political sense, how much I'm ready to get down and get ready to rock with her. But I'm not, I'm certainly not a flamethrower on this. I'm not mad. I'm not pissed. Like I said, I'm gonna celebrate what there is to celebrate on it. And then I'm gonna work, and most importantly, I'm gonna work to push her in whatever ways I can, towards the policies and positions that I feel like our community needs, right? And that's where we all have to be, is like, we got who we got, whoever that may be. We have to make an effort and put in the energy to see if we can get them.
And just like Barack Obama did, like he came in with a couple of stances that I actually didn't even agree with. But throughout his time, both of his terms, he pivoted on a couple of big issues, from gay marriage to the way small businesses are treated and bailouts and things like that. He pivoted on certain things. It is possible to evolve. She's a 55-year-old woman. She ain't 95 and stuck in her ways. Like, it's not that serious, Yes. So I love that you said that it's about electing the person who is a leader. And leader does not mean you're set in your ways and you're a dictator. It means you are able to open yourself and hear and listen and comprehend and evolve. And that's not something that I'm seeing right now in this administration. So that's what I want. I don't want a perfect person, because one does not exist. So yeah, I think if anybody was going to listen and pivot and evolve on certain topics, which she actually already has, then
even over the primary, she moved on certain things. And so it's like, I'm willing to allow people to grow and to change. Like, that's just kind of my general ethos. Like, I believe that people can change, generally speaking. And so, like, let's give her this room and the space to do that. Let's do that for Uncle Joe as well. Now, granted, maybe a little harder, but let's see if folks can move in different places, and ultimately we can get to some policy positions that we can all agree on. So
perfect. Okay, what is voting day? What are the deadlines for mail-in voting in Kentucky?
So mail-in voting, I don't know yet. They haven't released the official timeline for that yet. Last day to register in Kentucky is October 5th. And so if you need to register, please do. We had our governor, our newly elected governor, restored the rights of over 140,000 felons, which is huge, which means they can now vote. And so we at the Louisville Urban League are actively seeking to reach out to those individuals to make sure that they know that happened.
So question, was that already put into action? Because I've heard both things. I've heard that it's a woman, right?
It's a man.
Oh, it's a man? I'm thinking of a different state. What was Kentucky though? That they said, yes, I will do this, but there's no specific set date on when it will actually go into action.
No, that happened. So it's done.
Okay.
It happened this last year.
Okay.
And so it went into effect. And so we're trying to reach out to contact folks to let them know, like, hey, you can vote. Let us help you get registered, all that sort of stuff.
Right.
And that's true in a lot of different states. And so, we're really pushing registration. That's a big deal. But again, the real big thing is going to be turnout. Like, we need folks to turn out and show up at the polls.
Okay. And I know, generally speaking, we're working with Michelle Obama's When We All Vote. We're one of the media partners for that organization. And one thing that we are pushing, is that October 13th or so, just having that in your head as an election day and trying to aim to have your mail-in ballot mailed off by then, because we see the foolishness happening with the post office.
Absolutely.
Just thinking that in your head, October 13th, around that time, trying to mail it off so there are no excuses for it to get there in time. So.
Yes, and if you have early voting in your state, go vote in person, go vote early. You'll probably be able to do it safely and social distance and all that sort of stuff, because we're going to also be pushing that. It's like, get out and go vote, get it taken care of weeks in advance. That way you don't have to worry about it on election day.
Right.
Because some folks are just like, I ain't fooling with no paper ballot. That's fine. I get it. That's fine. But also the reason for early voting, though, is because what we did see in the primary, where there were some challenges to some people's ability to vote because they had them registered wrong or wrong precinct or had them wrong party affiliation, that sort of stuff. So if there's an issue with your voter registration, if you go and vote early, that gives you some time to get that sorted out so that you can vote and your vote will be counted. So please, 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 folks, vote early if you have the opportunity to do so.
Love it. Love it. Okay. Any last words for what the Louisville Urban League wants the world to know?
Oh, that's real big. I don't know. I mean, look, I will say this. You can see in my background, like, justice for Breonna Taylor, like, that is paramount. We are pushing that. And that is absolutely first and foremost, firing all of the officers who are responsible for her death and then arresting them and putting them through the process as it should be. But it's bigger than that, right? Because Breonna Taylor's death is emblematic of all of the other systematic problems that we have in this community and that we see across the nation. And so we at the Louisville Urban League are pushing for justice in every area: jobs, justice, education, health, and housing. Like, we want to see justice all over the place. We want to see racial justice. We want to see racial equity. We want our community to thrive. We want to be able to build wealth and live free. Finally in this country. And so if folks want to support us, they can find out information lul.org to learn more about the Urban League or the National Urban League movement. You can look up information on the National Urban League as well. They just released their State of Black America report today. Our CEO participated in that as a virtual event. So we encourage folks to check that out. They're talking about some real powerful stuff there as well.
Oh, I love it. All right. We learned so much today. Yay!
Absolutely.
And if Daniel Cameron does not do his job, I mean, what?
Dan Cameron got a list a mile long of folks who have said they're gonna show up in Louisville, Kentucky. So we are going to be cautiously optimistic that he.
You are way more optimistic than me.
I mean,
I'm just like, what's the next step? I don't trust it. What's the next step?
Look, I live here, so I got to be cautiously optimistic. So, because there's no telling how that goes down. Things don't happen. All
right. Well, we're all going to try to be more cautiously optimistic as well. Thank you so much for doing this. It was so informative. Absolutely. And like, honestly, like, I love seeing things come full circle. Yes. I think I don't know. The universe. It just makes sense, you know?
The universe. Absolutely. Because I remember you cracking this thing out over a laptop.
Wait. No, you're right. You are right. I actually started it during a certain time, and you were right there next to me.
That's right. I
and
recall.
So thank
you. Hey, I mean, this is 15 years past Katrina. You have your anniversaries. Because this all happened right around that same time.
We had an anniversary situation gonna happen, but then COVID, you know. So yeah, I don't know about that anymore, but yeah, it's our 15-year anniversary this year. It actually was in June, around June. So,
well,
yeah.
shoot. Well, it is amazing to see what this empire has become. So,
what a law school dropout has become.
Hey, look, now I will tell you this: you need to make sure you out here telling that story, right? Because it is a remarkable story of perseverance and overcoming obstacles, but also just commitment to like an idea. Because again, I remember when it was a random ass idea.
Very random.
Like, why don't we do this? Because there's only white people over here doing this.
Yeah,
and so
what I said. And also, I'm not going to go back to law school because I damn near failing out anyway. They're going to take my scholarship and they want me to come back and pay for it? No, I'm going to just blog. And you were right there like, I mean, okay. I guess, what you need help with, you know? And you definitely helped me out, and you were not, I mean, you weren't super judgmental, but I'm sure you were side-eyeing me. I'm sure.
It's not judgmental, but you know, that was just the space. You was like, we're finna talk about this gossip. And I was like, okay, that's cool. I guess that's a thing. Like, you knew it though, because it was only like two other people who were really in that space, dominating it. Exactly. And so when you said like, yeah, look at these folks, I was like, all right.
They're both white, and you're like, I don't know
how that's gonna work, but let's do this.
Yeah.
And you did, right? And you did, and so that is absolutely amazing. So again, just many congrats to you. Absolutely proud to be able to share space and time with you, and to be able to understand and see this journey where it is. And I know it's gonna keep going. Like,
I hope.
Well, you know, the benefit of, you know, COVID ain't gonna mess with the online platform too much. So
not too much. Thankfully, people still want their entertainment news, and you know, now that we're doing politics as well, that ain't going away. So,
so awesome stuff. But yeah, thanks for having me on. Thanks for repping Louisville. Like, I mean, that's huge to be able to get the city and Brianna's name. You know, just keep it alive and moving. I really appreciate that.
It's a big effing deal, and we want to talk about it. So, thank you, and we will be talking soon. Y'all know the deal. Like, comment, subscribe on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube, Apple, iHeart, Spotify. We on all the platforms. Get your life together and click. Like, comment, subscribe. Thank y'all so much for tuning in and listening and watching. I hope you learned a lot. Visit theybf.com as always, and thank y'all for listening and watching. Bye.